Just as Canada seeks to cut immigration, a surge of refugees could overwhelm its U.S. border. Desperate to escape President-elect Trump's planned deportation policy, Canadian police are preparing for a huge influx of unregistered crossings, followed by asylum claims. So, can Canadian immigration officials manage a potential crisis on the world's longest land border? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Canada's immigration surge. Well, it used to be celebrated as one of the longest open borders on the planet, but as the world changes and immigration becomes a liability for many politicians, the border between the U.S. and Canada is under close watch. Canadians who used to embrace an open immigration policy are looking to dramatically cut back on those that they legally welcome. But that cutback may not compensate for those who could enter illegally from the United States once Donald Trump takes office. Here's a look.
During Donald Trump's first term, Canada faced a surge of illegal border crossings as asylum seekers from Venezuela, Haiti, and other nations sought refuge. Now, with Trump's plans for the largest mass deportation in US history, Canada is bracing for another wave. At the same time, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced cuts to Canada's immigration targets, hoping to slow down the country's rapid population growth ahead of the 2025 elections.
Immigration is essential for Canada's future, but it must be controlled and it must be sustainable. With today's annual immigration plan, that is precisely what we're doing.
The latest polls show growing dissatisfaction, with half of Canadians concerned about the impact of immigration. Trudeau's move, though, to cut immigration from 500,000 to 395,000 people in 2025 may be too little, too late to win back disillusioned voters.
It's fair to say that we've had to make some changes that reflect concerns by Canadians, our own concern about the impact of the flow of migration that has been aggressive in particularly the last couple of years. It's safe to say that we own a part of that. It's also safe to say, particularly on the inflow of temporary residents, that we perhaps should have acted a little sooner.
During the last migration spike, Canada resettled more refugees than any other country in the world. This time, though, the country is preparing for an even larger wave as Trump's mass deportations approach. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police has already deployed additional officers to patrol the 800-kilometre border with Quebec, but their task is enormous. At a length of almost 9,000 kilometres, the US-Canada border is the longest in the world.
For just under 2 years, the Canadian public has been bombarded by narratives that there are just too many people in the country and too many people coming into the country for the number of houses that we have and for the capacity of our healthcare system. And that slow drumbeat has, finally hit home with the public.
At the moment, there are more people crossing the border illegally going from Canada to the United States. It's part of why Donald Trump has threatened tariffs unless border security is tightened. The RCMP is in the process of doing that, but actually it's more in response to the threat of another wave of asylum seekers coming from the US to Canada.
So that's the irony, that President-elect Trump wants to penalize Canada for failing to control the flow of illegal border crossings into the U.S., while many are predicting that that will go into reverse, with thousands instead crossing into Canada. And that's just as Ottawa tries to reduce immigration. Well, joining me now to debate what could really happen, as well as the political and social consequences, are from Vancouver, founder of the Cultural Action Party of Canada, Brad Salzberg. From Toronto, Canada Excellence Research Chair in Migration and Integration at Toronto Metropolitan University, Anna Triandafilidou. And also from Toronto, Emeritus Professor of Political Science at the University of Toronto, Nelson Wiseman. Thanks all so much for being with me. Brad, I'll start with you. And first, let's look at how likely it is that this trend of illegal crossings from Canada into the U.S. will turn around And will Canada need to beef up security on the border, if it even can, given it's almost 9,000 kilometers long?
I would say that progress will be made in this area, but it should be stated that much of this is done with reluctance on the part of the Canadian federal government. Um, as you mentioned, the threat of the 25% tariff is serving and will serve as an incentive for the Trudeau government, a ruling liberal government of Canada, to be more vigilant in this regard. And we have seen signs of that of late. Um, and yes, I think some progress will be made, but I do believe that without Mr. Trump's incentive of this across the board tariff, it would be the vigilance on the part of government would be far less.
Okay, well, let me ask Anna then if you are, first of all, actually expecting a surge when President Trump takes office, or actually before he takes office, because some of the Canadian police officials are saying that people are going to try to run into Canada before January. Do you think that is actually true, and does Canada need to be ready?
Well, I think, first of all, it is important to say that this is an alive border. It's a border that connects the two countries. It's not a border that separates them. And there's a lot of families, a lot of businesses that live on the both sides of the border. So I think that is important to understand the nature of this border. And as you said, it's a very long one. So it's not one that can be policed. And Canada and the United States in their history have not been used to police in such a border in ways that we have seen in other places in the world, including, for instance, Europe. I think there is a lot of talk right now about what would happen to people with precarious status in the United States, and unfortunately, there are many of them. We have estimates there's 12.5 million without status or with very precarious status. The famous DACA people, so the people of deferred action, people who have lived in the United States all their lives, but who arrived in the United States as children, so they were not born there. Yes, as experts, we are wondering what will happen. Yes, we know the government has a contingency plan that they will not reveal. But I think it is important to build, as we know, a border cannot be guarded on one side, so a border needs both sides. And I think that's what the current government has been trying to do.
Can I ask you, though, Anna, I mean, you don't know what the contingency plan actually is, but what would you like to see Canada do? I mean, is it possible that Canadian officials could take the action that we've seen on the southern border of the United States, which is quite aggressive, to try and block people from coming in? Would Canada do the same?
Okay, Canada and the United States have something called the Safe Third Country Agreement. So that means that for Canada, the United States is a safe country. So people who go through the United States cannot apply for asylum in Canada. This Safe Third Country Agreement until March 2023 applied only to official border crossing points. As of March 2023, applies across the border. However, it is to be, we need to remember that during the previous Trump presidency, Canadian courts had said that the US was not a safe country for some people and that these people could apply for asylum. I think Canada is a country that lives by its principles. And one of these principles, and it's an international obligation, not just for Canada, but for all the signatories of the Geneva Convention, that there is a right to asylum. There is a right to seek protection. It is clear that at the same time, the Canadian asylum system right now is quite overburdened. There has been a relatively high number of asylum applications. In 2023, there were about 150,000. Most of them were inland applications, not at the border. So that is something different. And it is important also to know that Canada has a big resettlement program. So Canada resettles refugees from other world regions.
Right. Let me ask Nelson, though, before you go too far, because Nelson, I could see you disagree with at least part of what Anna was saying. On which points?
Well, actually, the safe third party agreement, in my opinion, has worked very well. And we've had very few people relatively coming over. You can't compare Canada's border to the Mexican border. Last year, 1.5 million people crossed into the United States undocumented, and that were caught by the American officials. The number coming into Canada is really very small. In fact, I don't know the number.
It is now, but do you expect a surge?
Well, nobody knows. I noticed, Andrea, you said, do I expect a surge before January 20th? Well, wouldn't have the surge already happened? No, I think a lot of, look, we're taking this too seriously. We heard about 25% tariffs. That isn't, I believe, going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is not because Trudeau is sweet talking Trudeau, it's because of American business interests. Our two economies are tied so closely together. There are literally tens of thousands of people that grow across the border every day, and I'm not even talking about the value, as Anna referred to, of all the commerce that goes across, back and forth.
Oh, well, that's interesting. But I don't want to get too far into that discussion because Trump is also saying, you know, the reason for putting tariffs on Canada and Mexico, it's not just about immigration. It's protecting, you know, U.S. products and production and business interests. And you can disagree with him on that, which many people do, but he may make that call regardless. But still, when it comes to the border, let me come back to Brad quickly because I have to ask you, you know, while Anna says really this border can't be policed, what do you think is necessary and what would need to be done to effectively patrol this border as you would see fit?
You know, there's a couple important points. My take is a little bit different on this. Like that the motivation for Trump to is multifaceted. It's weapons, guns, drugs, fentanyl in particular, and illegal refugees. There are multiple factors involved in the policing of the border and stepping this up. I can't completely speak to. It doesn't seem feasible to patrol the border. You can exercise vigilance, which hasn't occurred, and that the Liberal government's approach has been lax and permitting tens of thousands of illegal refugees to come into Canada. I think, and this is a big call, but as our guests mentioned, the UN, United Nations Refugee Act, and various others, and this goes back to after the Second World War in 1951. These agreements, the negative effect and real impact comes years and decades later down the road, and this is what we're seeing now. And frankly, I do have a problem with our guest's take on this. It sounds like they're on the refugee. I am not a refugee advocate.
Okay,
So,
right. I understood that. But so, I mean, let me ask Anna then, because it seems that Brad is saying these, you know, agreements made after World War II, internationally protecting, you know, the rights of refugees to cross borders when their life is in danger, et cetera, need to be reconsidered at this point. So is that even a possibility? I mean, Anna, I imagine you'd fear that happening, but he's not the only one to have said that. Anna, go ahead.
I think I trust the international community. There's no way we're going back on that. It took a Holocaust to get to that, and I don't think we're going back. That is for sure. There's no such thing as an illegal refugee. So we should be careful with the way we use the terminology. The people who through a border, oftentimes, and I'm sure you know that in Turkey too, people who come through a border don't have the necessary documents, but they do have a right to apply for asylum. And there's also different measures for protection, which concern people who are massively fleeing war or a conflict or an environmental disaster. And we don't need to get into that. I also want to clarify that the Safe Third Country Agreement was agreed between Canada and the United States at the wake of 9/11, so in 2003. So it is true it was an agreement at a different time for a different purpose. It was under strain, as I said, in the period 2015-2017. Still, the numbers coming into Canada were in the 40,000, 30,000, 50,000. I'm sure someone who is in the European context and in the Mediterranean context can understand that these are not really high numbers. I want also to emphasize that Canada has a 40 million population and the United States has a 330 million population. So we need to keep these numbers in mind to understand what the specific numbers of the border mean. When the Safe Third Country Agreement was tied, the previous year there had been 39,000 people crossing the border from the US to Canada. I want to let you know that Canada has a program to welcome new permanent residents every year. Canada is a pro-immigration country. Immigration is
Right,
part
but
of
that's
our
what they're
The
looking.
government,
They're looking to
yeah,
revise
yeah,
that now.
year
and they
500,000
are.
people as new residents, and we accept 700,000 temporary residents. So you tell me if 39,000 people can rock the boat. They cannot rock the boat. So I think it's all very much a matter of perspective.
Quickly, Brad, before I
Yeah,
go to Nelson, go ahead.
yeah, I have to say I'm diametrically opposed with what our guest is saying. There is no mandate from the Canadian people, no democratic
Again,
related to Canada transitioning to the refugee capital of the world. You know, it's the attitude of ladies like this who really are contributing to Canada's degeneration as a sovereign and independent nation. Um, so I have to say, and this
okay.
is academia speaking.
Let me ask Nelson then, where you stand hearing these two diametrically opposed positions, as Brad characterized it. And tell me, Nelson, where you think, and Anna, I'll ask if you feel the same, where popular sentiment really does stand. Are Canadians turning against immigration, or is there still at that core that welcoming, we want a diverse society, bring people in because we also need them?
The core is still there. It's not as solid as it was. Canada has been a leader in terms of public attitudes toward immigration. In the last couple of years, however, there's been such an influx under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program and also a dramatic expansion of students coming in at the request of businesses for temporary work and also to register at our colleges, that now it's placed great burden on housing in the country, affordability generally, and also a perception that we can't handle this volume of people coming in. And one of the distinctions I would make between Anna and Brad is I think Brad is reflecting growing public sentiment. Is it the dominant view? No. Brad, in the introduction, represents a party that I've never heard of. And I teach on political parties in Canada. Anna, on the other hand, is an authority and an expert on immigration. What I would add as an addendum to what Anna said is yes, Canada has a safe third party agreement with the United States, but it's not a treaty. Trump could rip that up in a minute and encourage people to come to Canada. I don't know what he's going to do. Nobody knows what he's going to do. What I took away from the meeting between Trump and Trudeau, which got international headlines, is that Trump is primarily concerned about drugs. And there are very few drugs going into the United States compared to what is going in from Mexico. In fact, I think it's 0.2% when you compare them. A greater danger or from the Canadian perspective, what the big problem is are guns coming from the United States. This is also the big problem for the Mexicans. And I think it's over 90% of the gun crimes in Canada are committed with guns that have been smuggled in from the United States. And how do you control that? When you get to a land border in Canada by car, a, custom agents are required to spend no more time than 1 or 2 minutes with you. I
Right.
know because my brother has worked as one.
Yeah. That's what has made, in some senses, the Canadian-American border very special, because it has been, in a sense, an open border where you don't have to. There is not a divide between the two peoples, but that is looks more and more set to change. Let me come back to Anna, though, because Nelson mentioned, Trump's unpredictability, as well as the housing and basic affordability crisis that's really pushing what could have been more tolerant or welcoming Canadians into a somewhat different dimension. What are you feeling? Where are their sentiments going now?
Well, first of all, I think it is important to clarify that the housing affordability crisis is not related to immigration. The housing affordability, unfortunately, has been built through policies or the absence of policies for over 20 years, lack of investment in public housing, too much of a free hand towards developers who are building big condos that are very expensive. And there is a polarization right now in the big cities where you either have the very big one family houses populated by 3 or 4 people families or by a couple. And then you have the condos where people live in quite dense conditions. And we lack all the kinds of houses that are in between. And I think provincial governments, cities, and the federal government are working to address that. But obviously, that cannot be addressed in a year or two. So it's a long-term process. And I think they have realized that. And it relates also to city regulation, what is called zoning laws, etc. Now, however, it is true, what Nelson said is absolutely true, that in the public debate, housing has been related to immigration, people thinking, it's a pure mathematics. If there's 100 houses and there's 100 people, it's okay. If it's 100 houses and 200 people, it's not okay. But it is not how it works. I want to emphasize, for instance, that newcomers and international students, and by newcomers, I mean new economic immigrants, rent basement apartments, rent bedrooms in families that have been suffering in paying their mortgage loans. And these people, as Nelson said, take up jobs that are generally not very well paid, not good jobs in tourism, in catering, in food processing, in the care sector where there is a dire need. So there has certainly, and this is true for all countries, there's no single national interest on immigration. There's very different views. So let me say a couple of things about public opinion. So Canada, yes, we have data that until 2022, including the period of COVID, Canadians were at 68, 70%, all positive in all the items asked about immigration, confident that our culture can integrate people, the people are good for the economy and making our communities better.
Right, Anna,
This has
we
changed.
just, that's as Nelson has said. But we're down to our last 60 seconds, actually. Brad, very quickly, I know you firmly disagree with most of the points Anna was making there, but there's also still the issue at play that there is a labor shortage in Canada, which is in large part why the immigration system was brought on board. I mean, are you solving problems or creating more problems by wanting to cut immigration so dramatically on all classes?
When you rely on immigration as a panacea for the Canadian economy, it also sets it up to go wrong. The reliance, and this is part of it. But the one thing I notice about this academic sort of approach, right, in the wording that Anna uses, Canada is pro-immigration or pro-refugee. Technically, I would disagree with that. Our government is pro-immigration, pro-refugee. The public opinion on these issues that we're discussing has changed. The so-called bell curve, we're on the downside of that now, and there's a significant change among voters and citizens in this regard. We
Okay.
note how
Yeah, so unfortunately, Brett, I'm
we
going to
note
have to
how
interrupt you there because we really are out of time. I mean, I guess the next election will have to show exactly how Canadians feel, and the interpretations can be made as to whether Trudeau paid the ultimate price for immigration policies or not. But for right now, we do have to go, and I'd like to thank all three of you so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.